Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
The Web Platform Podcast is a proud media sponsor of DevFest 2015. DevFest is a conference with great sessions and code labs on Android, Wearables, Polymer, AngularJS, Google Cloud Platform, Meteor, and many others. Show host Danny Blue and I, Erik Isaksen, will be speakers at this event, and we'd love to meet you all there, so come hang out with us in Dulles, Virginia. Yes, this event will be held at AOL headquarters in Dulles, Virginia, Friday, September 11th and Saturday, September 12th, 2015. For event registration details, check out DevFestDC.org and click on the Eventbrite link. Hope to see you there.
This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 57, or 56. Yes, 56. I'm jumping ahead of time. Today we're going to have on the panel Danny Blue.
Hey, everybody.
Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And myself, Erik Isaksen. Our guest today is the infamous Charles Max Wood, who's going to be talking about branding and building your brand as a developer. A lot of us sort of frown on that, but it's really important for a lot of things. So I felt it was a good topic to discuss. So, Chuck, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little about what you do?
Yeah. So I primarily do Ruby on Rails when I'm programming and AngularJS on the front end. I've got a number of podcasts that I'm a part of. Currently, that's Ruby Rogues, JavaScript Jabber, Freelancer Show, iFreaks, and I forgot one, Adventures in Angular. And then I also do Rails Clips, which is it's twice weekly. One's free and one paid every week. I have a subscription, and it's Ruby on Rails videos. And then I've organized a number of remote conferences, online conferences. You can actually go sign up for Angular Remote Conf right now at angularremoteconf.com. And we also have a call for proposals open through the end of August, so you can go sign up there. And I am working on, but haven't finalized anything on Rails Remote Conf. So that'll probably be in late October or early November. So I've got all that going on. Personally, I live in Utah. I've got 4 kids and one on the way. I love code. I love podcasting. I love meeting new people and talking about stuff. And so, yeah. So
you're an underachiever, right?
That's right.
I was just
I gotta say no to more stuff. That's my deal.
I was just going to say, if you feel like you've probably heard this guy's voice before, yes, you have. He's all over the place.
Well, we're all big fans of JavaScript Jabber here.
Yeah, thanks. It's really funny to go to conferences and be talking to somebody I know and then have somebody see their head come up at the conference and then they turn around because we're in line for food or something. Wait, you're Charles Max Wood. Yeah, that's me. Because they recognize my voice off of the show. And you see them thinking, my earbuds aren't in, and I'm hearing this voice.
You've done a lot of work in development and podcasting. Was podcasting something you've always done?
No, I wasn't born that way. But the short story is basically that I got hooked on podcasts in 2008, and I started listening. I thought, gee, it'd be fun to start one, so I emailed Greg Pollock, who you may have heard of from Code School. At the time, they had a podcast about Ruby on Rails called Rails Envy, and so I said, hey, I'd like to start a podcast. I want to do something. I don't want to do what you're doing because you're doing a good job of it, and he gave me a whole bunch of ideas, and it took off. So I started a podcast called Rails Coach, and I interviewed all the people that I wanted to talk to in the Rails community. That's how basically that went down. A few months later, I took over Teach Me to Code from my friend Erik Berry, and I did screencasts for 2 or 3 years. And then about 4 years ago, I'm a big fan of the twit.tv shows by Leo Laporte and friends. And James Edward Gray, whom I had interviewed twice on my Rails podcast, he got on and he mentioned that he was thinking that Ruby would kind of deserved a panel discussion podcast. And so I talked to him and we kind of pulled it together and picked the show name and started it off, and that's what got all this going. About 6 months later, Jameson Dance came to me and said, hey, I'd like to do one on JavaScript. How do I get it started? And I said, why don't I just do that for you? So we started JavaScript Jabber. And at the same time, I started one with a bunch of friends on freelancing. That was the Freelancer Show. And then we have iFreaks, which has been running for about a year or 2 years. And Adventures in Angular just turned over a year a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, I got to say no to more things, I guess. But I really enjoy doing the shows, and I really enjoy learning all the things I learn on the podcasts. That's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, and you were working originally at a I forgot the name of the company, but you were doing systems work, right, or IT work?
When I started podcasting, I was working for Mozy, and I was actually doing QA. So I was testing software, and that position lasted all of 6 months, and then I got my first development job.
Before we get into anything really deep, I just need to point out my biggest realization to this point is that your name is not Max Wood, it is Max Wood.
Yeah.
And
names,
yeah, and that was a big moment for me just now. What your name is, so.
Yeah, in case anyone's wondering, Charles is my grandfather's name, Max is my dad's name, and Wood is my last name. So.
Excellent.
Nice. So, I mean, this has helped you immensely, I'm assuming, as far as your development work, as far as building up a community. What is branding to a developer? Why should we really care?
So you kind of talked about the podcasts, building my personal brand, and then you talked about personal brand, and they're related, but they're not the same thing. So branding in general, the way I see it, is a way of connecting what value you offer to somebody with who you are. Okay, so when they think of whatever it is that you do, so let's say Ruby on Rails development, though that's kind of broad, but let's say Ruby on Rails development or Ruby. I want them to associate that with me, so then they give me the call when they need Ruby work done. Does that make sense? And so that's the branding. Or when I want to hear great conversations about code, I want them to make that association with Ruby Rogues. And so branding is really just an association in people's heads. And in a lot of cases, you kind of have to feed that to them a little bit. But for the most part, yeah, it's not just what you're known for. That's more reputation, but it's people recognizing what you can do or what value you can provide and being able to make that association when it comes up.
And how do you identify like what are the things that you want to brand yourself for? Like you said you want people to associate, good code with like Ruby Rogues. So like how do you start building on that?
Well, you have to know what you want people to know you for, right? So kind of accidentally, I'm known for programming podcasts. But, there are a few other things that I do. For example, I do work on Spree, which is an online shopping cart. And I really haven't pushed that branding much, but that's an example. So I really want people to associate I need work done on Spree with Charles Max Wood or with a company I've set up. So you have to identify that. A lot of people build their brand around things that they think will make them money. Please, that's a terrible idea. Build your brand around something you enjoy. At this point, being a programmer puts you in a terrific position. A lot of people need that work. More and more people are going to need that kind of work. So you really don't have to sacrifice much in the way of pay or anything else to pick up interesting projects. So build your brand around something you enjoy. The other thing is I encourage this, if you're looking for full-time employment, you can get away with a lot more as a freelancer. I definitely encourage you to niche down. And the reason is because out there's kind of a lot of people out there doing Ruby on Rails or Node.js or MeanStack or Angular. But if you can go in and you can say, hey, look, I really understand the issues surrounding finances or medical billing or medical information or a lot of these areas where it's not really your skill set, but it's your knowledge, your understanding of the market, the understanding of the problems that exist there. If you can build your brand around that, then all of a sudden you become way more valuable to those people because you can solve the really tricky problems that not many people can solve. if you're just looking to kind of skate by on a full-time job, move from job to job periodically to get a raise, it's not as important, because really then what they're looking for is, does this person meet the criteria for the job? Am I going to like working with them, et cetera, et cetera? And so then having your brand out there really just helps you, yeah, he's one of the top people in whatever technology. And so in that case, you can be a little broader and get away with it, and then you just build your reputation based upon the exercises you go through in building your brand. And that way you become in demand and you stand out among the other people who are out there, but you don't actually have to prove that you're going to solve that exact problem, because usually they're hiring you to come in and be part of a team and lend your expertise that way. And so, niching down then in that case may actually limit your options as far as getting a job.
But with the problem with niches in general, though, right, is a cause for brand difference, right? You have to create a difference amongst yourself, amongst other people. I mean, how do you do that when you are dealing with niches? I mean, a lot of people claim that GitHub is your resume these days, which I don't find to be particularly true. I think it's a hallmark, so to speak, of things that you would necessarily use as reference material. But when you really talk about brand and difference, with so many people who are experts in particular target areas, how do you prove that niche? I mean, medical billing software on, for instance, GitHub, probably not the greatest open source find online. Like, how do you define that difference against your brand?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is, so there are two areas that you brought up. One is GitHub your resume, and the answer is maybe. But as far as differentiating yourself, I mean, if you're writing code, let's say you're writing open source software that helps encrypt medical records, a lot of people really aren't going to care about that. And if you're going to go and try and get a job, you're going to be talking to managers and other people where they're not going to go look at your code. They're not really going to care what it looks like. All they care is whether or not you can solve that problem. If you're talking to a hiring manager instead who is a programmer and who goes out and kind of looks at what's out there, and he can figure out what what quality you have. I mean, that's a different thing altogether. And so you have to identify as well who you're targeting. Yeah, I mean, is GitHub your resume? Well, maybe, but it's more your resume for other programmers. So, if they have somebody who's going to vouch for you or who's going to look at your code, or, if you're going to be hired by a technical manager, then yeah, it makes a lot of difference because they can actually go and evaluate that. If you're building a brand around something else, so you're in an industry where you're going to be hired by people who don't have technical expertise, then GitHub's not going to make a lot of difference. Instead, what they're really going to want to see is other examples of the work that you've done. And so you can write an open source Rails app that's actually a full-on EHR, which is electronic healthcare or healthcare records system, or you can build systems that solve particular problems that they can actually go and touch and use. But that's a different branding exercise because you're targeting a different audience.
So how do developers get started with that? I mean, targeting out within particular niches, can be tough, right? I mean, if you're as someone who's come out of telecom, you're going to look at my GitHub history of things and go, you probably didn't work in telecom.
Right.
Though everyone in telecom knows you're probably not publishing a lot of open source material in telecom. I mean, how do you build those targets when, if GitHub is your resume to developers, are hiring managers seeing your personal brand through those interfaces? I mean, are places like, does Twitter matter in the grand scope of your, particular personal brand? I mean, as if you're trying to be hired for X, like, how do those translate to relevance, I suppose, within what a developer would normally do? Because a lot of developers aren't going to, they hear the word brand, they go, because, it's, I just want to write code, and they don't want to necessarily think about brand. But obviously these things sort of interlink. Where's a good start point for those interlinkings?
It's a hard question to answer because it really depends. It does. The person that you're talking to is going to care about something different from the next person you're going to talk to. So somebody is going to follow you on Twitter, and they're going to think you're a genius, and they're never going to look at your code. And somebody else is going to follow you on GitHub, and they're going to look at what you're working on, and they're going to say, I need that, and they're going to hire you. So it really does depend, and everybody's a little bit different. Ultimately, you kind of have to play in the sandboxes that people are looking in. I have to say, though, that the other big thing about building a brand that has nothing to do with anything we've talked about so far is building relationships. And if you can get referrals by, so let's go back to medical software. If you can get referrals by a doctor that he's telling his friends, hey, this guy, he nailed it. He solved my problem. He built this awesome thing for me. And even though it's not open source, even though nobody's really going to see it, you have a way in. You can go to their conferences and make friends and make contacts there. I was just at Podcast Movement. Podcasters, right? You would think, okay, well, they all live on WordPress, and this guy's a Ruby on Rails developer. But I ran into a couple of people that were doing stuff either with AngularJS or Ruby on Rails that were actually going, okay, this guy gets me. He does what I do. He gets what I am about, and he can actually solve my problem, and he's a contractor that does this for a living. And so I made a couple of solid connections there. Were they following me on Twitter? No. Or were they following me on Google+? They are now. But what it really meant was, hey, look, and I also got vouched for by other people in the community that knew who I was, so I was getting introduced and things like that. And I wasn't there specifically to make those connections, but anybody in the podcasting community that has some custom-built software in Ruby on Rails, they're looking at me because I get what they're about. And it wasn't any branding exercise I did. There's nothing on GitHub that they're going to look at and go, oh, wow, podcasting. And there's nothing on Twitter that they're going to look at and go, oh, wow, this guy can definitely solve my problem, because my posts are mostly about programming and not podcasting. But at the same time, it was those connections that led into that branding, and that's where it's going to lead into some of these other areas. And really all it took was going to the conference, making a few connections, and then getting introduced to the right people who needed my help.
It's a very, I guess, real-world way of connecting it, because most developers at this point kind of live online, right? We've talked about GitHub and Twitter and that kind of stuff. Sometimes you kind of forget about the actual face-to-face communication you sometimes have to have with people. I do want to talk about your online presence a little bit, not yours specifically, but the royal you, everybody's, everybody's internet presence. The internet is an amazing thing, and it's also can be a very crippling thing. So, as soon as you are willing to put an opinion or try to promote yourself in any way, so you're trying to build your brand by writing blog posts, by trying to post interesting things on Twitter, or podcasting is a good example. This is something that is online right now that people could either hate a lot or they could like. It can be very difficult when people don't like your things, and that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with is, okay, I want to start building my brand for Ruby development. We've been talking about Ruby development for medical software, and say you want to write a blog post saying how X industry can benefit from something. There's always going to be people that disagree with you,
right?
Which is good, but how do you deal with rejection and just trolls and haters on the internet when you're trying to share what you know and what you think is best, and people are just very angrily against you for it?
So with technology, typically I don't run into this very much. And the reason is because most of the time somebody can look at the argument and say, yes, you're right, or no, you're not. And with most of the things that we discuss on Ruby Rogues and things, we kind of hit a pretty moderate stride where even if somebody says, no, this is the absolute way to go, there is always a discussion of trade-offs. And so we really don't run into this a whole lot. Now, on some of the other counts, I've definitely gotten some blowback on some things. I can give you a couple of examples. On one episode of the Freelancer Show, I think I picked something about, it was right during one of the, right after one of the shootings of something or other. I don't remember which one, but I picked something about guns because I like guns. And so I got some blowback on that. More recently, on several of the podcasts, I don't talk about it a lot on the shows just because it's mostly off topic, but we have a section called Picks, which is off topic or can be off topic. And so I picked God and Jesus Christ, and I talked about my faith a little bit, and that made some people uncomfortable. So in the case of the gun thing, I mean, I basically I figured if people aren't up with, or if people aren't okay with me liking the stuff I like, then too bad for them. On the faith thing, it was a little bit different because I actually had it happen. I had some feedback within the Ruby Rogues Parlay forum, which is an online community, and I felt I needed to respond. But mostly it was more, this made me uncomfortable, and then it was a discussion over why we should or shouldn't accept the way people talk about things and how we felt about it. And so in that case, it kind of turned around into a positive and constructive conversation about things. But for the most part, I think most people worry about haters because they want to make everybody happy and they want to be right. If somebody comes and says that your opinion is garbage, then look at their arguments. And if they're right, then go ahead and just respond and say, yeah, you're right. If they're not, then who needs them? Then they can go post it on their own blog. Yeah.
People are strange. I do moderation for a couple of groups, and
that's fun.
Yeah. So there's one person who posted, I'm not going to say which group it is, but they were very upset with some software that was released, and so they were bad-mouthing the developers on a post. And there was no cursing or anything, but it was pretty nasty. And
mm-hmm.
And I just, people work hard on that stuff, and whether you like it or not, it's just not right to just lash out at people.
Yeah, in a community, it's a little bit different because most communities have guidelines, and so you can just say, look, you're out of line, here's the guidelines, you don't do that anymore. And, we've removed people from the forums for the same kind of thing. But as far as, I get stuff on the format of the show sometimes. I hate it when you do this, or I really don't like the intro. I get that a lot from JavaScript Jabber. People either love the intro music, or they absolutely hate it. Like, nobody's ambivalent toward it, right? And it's just like, what? This is the show. This is the show we want to make. This is the way we want to make it. And so, you can tell me I'm doing it wrong, and I'll tell you that there's probably another show out there that's doing it right, so go listen to them. And ultimately, this does come back a little bit to the brand, because if they don't fit that brand, then they're going to react to what you're putting out there. And so what you want to do is you want to draw in the people that see the value in what you're putting out there, and not the people who are going to get angry about it.
That's so funny you say that about the music, because like JavaScript Jabber, if I hear the music, I just start singing along.
Nice.
So it's like if I heard that someplace else, I would immediately associate it with your podcast.
Yeah, I have to say that 99% of the time it's, what's that music? I love it. But we've gotten a few people that I can't stand it. I almost can't listen to your show because of it. And it's like, look, we're putting together the show we want to put together. I happen to like the music. I didn't pick it, but I like it. And, if the music is such a turnoff to you, then I'm sorry, but I guess we're not your show. And the thing is I would rather go out and find people who like what I do for what it is, rather than try and cater to everybody, because it won't work. And, the haters are the most extreme of that. I do have to point out, too, that on the internet, some haters go way beyond what's reasonable, so they're not screaming and yelling, they're actually, doxing people and stuff like that, and that's totally not cool. Most of the time it's going to be pretty, people get their anonymous, handle on, and then they go and say dumb crap.
I think it is important to point out, not just to point out, but to what pretty much you've been saying, is that you're not going to please everybody. So if at any point, if you're worried about putting out a piece of content, if you've written a blog post about whatever, and in development it could range for anything. Google whether or not you should use factories or constructors in JavaScript, and you'll run into walls of stuff on what you should do. But you've done it. You feel good about it. It's a code pen. It's GitHub. It's a blog post. Whatever it is. If you get blowback at all from anything, if you have people that disagree with it, what I think is very important to realize is that means somebody probably read it or looked at it.
Yeah.
And that's actually a pretty big deal. It's like, okay, somebody looked at this closely enough to disagree with me. And sometimes that's the way that you should take it. And you also mentioned, look at what they said. Like, maybe they're correct. Maybe you were like, oh man, I was off point on this. I was off base on something.
Mm-hmm.
But don't worry about pleasing the worldwide spectrum that is the internet. There's a lot of different people out there, and you have to focus on what you need to focus on.
Yep. And the other point is just don't miss the opportunity to go explore something new. So if somebody comes in and they bring up a point you never considered, yeah, go consider it. Go write your next blog post on what you thought of that and what the trade-offs are. And then, you can talk about what the context is and why it matters.
It's really hard for us. It used to be when I started in software that it's CYA, and now you have to really be open-minded to understand that it's okay to be wrong.
Yep.
You can admit that even if you're on a public podcast. And getting back to some of the branding issues. So for freelancing, because you do a lot of freelance work versus being an employee, how is that different for branding?
So as I said before, I mean, you're branding as an employee. So let me back up because there are a couple of thoughts here, and I don't want to mix them up. So let's talk about freelancing for a minute. When you're doing branding as a freelancer, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get people to come to you and ask you to solve their problem. You don't want to be out there trolling the internet, trying to find people, and hoping that you stumble across the right person that will pay you enough money to do the job. So your branding there is really about that association I talked about before, where it's you have a very specific problem. And I have the skills and the experience, more experience than these other guys, to give you a very specific solution that's going to solve your problem, solve it well. It's going to be less prone to bugs because I know what I'm doing. I'm an expert in that niche. With employees, it's a little bit different, and I kind of think of two sort of classes with employees. So the first kind of branding with employees is there enough out there so that when I go apply for the job I want, they can go out there and see that I'm qualified for the job, that maybe I'm more qualified than the other candidates, and that I'll get the job. And that's kind of the base level for this. I mean, otherwise, what you have to do is you have to go through the same process that everybody else goes through. So you walk in, you drop off a piece of paper, they put it in the stack with all the other ones, then it has to actually get their attention. It can't just say, oh, I do Rails, and I've done Rails for a long time, because it won't stand out enough for them to call you back for an interview. And then you have to go through the interview, and then you probably have to go through a second interview, and then you probably have to sit down and pair program with somebody. And so they have to go through all this vetting process that can be short-circuited by this brand. And so if you want to get around that branding issue or get around that process, it's much easier to go in the other way and either get noticed by one of the employees or meet them at a users group and be able to give them enough information to go and short-circuit you in for an interview and all of this stuff. A lot of times they'll make up their mind before they even talk to you. And that's where branding really pays off. And then there are the people who are kind of the pillars of the community, so to speak. So they're out there, they work for some company. Some of the ones that I'm thinking of are some of the guys that work in Seattle. There was a group of programmers up there in Seattle RB. And a lot of them work for AT&T Interactive. And they could probably write their ticket to just about anywhere because they've written libraries, they've participated in Rails core or Ruby core teams. So they've been out there and they kind of hit that extreme of the branding where everybody knows who they are. They're keynoting at the big conferences. And so they go to the company they want to work for and they say, "Can I have a job?" And they go, "Yep." But for the most part, you're probably not at that end. You're probably somewhere along the spectrum. And so the more information you have out there, the more proof you have out there of that stuff, the easier it is going to be to find that job. And the other thing I want to point out is that, so Ruby Rogues, last time I checked, got about 150,000 downloads in a month. And JavaScript Jabber got about 250,000 in a month. So if I need work, I just go on the show and I say, I need work. And it's kind of the same thing for me because the people who are listening now, I don't think I'm like everybody knows me in the community, but everybody listening to that show does. And so if I have 40 or 50,000 people listening to that show every week, and I say I need work, I'm probably going to find work, because those folks want to work with me. They want to find an opportunity to get to know me, or they want to do me a favor because they feel like I've done well for them. So anyway, there are a lot of different things that come into play here, but ultimately that's the main difference. Is your branding good enough to get you a job? Is the employee end, unless you're at that top end, versus freelancing is your branding good enough, and is it reaching enough people, the right people, to actually have them call you and say, I want you to work for me.
Yeah, so, I had that when I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was so what I was going to say is that kind of leads into something else I was I was curious about is, as a developer in the community, for whatever library or language or framework or whatever, do you have to work? It sounds like from what you're saying, like the people that you hear about a lot work for big companies. They work for Google and they work for Apple. Maybe not Apple as much, just because they aren't allowed to talk as much.
Right.
But especially Google and Microsoft are really good examples now where, and we've gotten to talk to a lot of people from them. But do you have to work at one of those large companies to build a brand that people are going to recognize?
No, not at all. My friend John Sonmez, his job, or his blog, Simple Programmer, fairly popular blog, he got called out of the blue, I think once or twice, by companies that said, hey, we want you to come work for us. We've been reading your blog for a while. The last job that he had before he went out on his own was at a company that you probably never heard of. And so it doesn't need to be that. There are other ways that you can stand out. And again, I mean, what it really boils down to is the people who are following you. Are there enough of them? Are there enough of the right ones that are going to make that difference for you? And most people, if they have a full-time job, they only have one. So you only need one, right? So if the one that you're in isn't working out for you, or you feel like you can get paid better or something, you have a reason to move, you only need to find another one. And so you only have to have your brand. If you're looking for that kind of movement, you only need to have your brand so big or well known in order to be able to do that. The other thing is that a lot of people, they build video series. Ryan Bates did Railscasts for years, and I think he was doing work for his dad's company, doing some on the side web development, but everybody knew who he was. I could go on and on with examples of this where people, Isaac Schluter, I don't even know where he was working before he went to NPM, but he wrote NPM, and he also maintained Node.js for a long time. And he didn't work for those big companies. He just solved people's problems in a meaningful way, and it turned out that it was a lot of people's problems. And so, a lot of people figured out who he was. So, I mean, if you're out there adding value to the community, and my contributions to the community are not code, they're podcasts, in that case, just be where you are, just do what you do, and you don't have to be at the Googles or Microsofts. It does help a little bit because they usually will help you build your platform a little bit, and it's definitely something that people look at on the resume and go, oh yeah, Google. But you don't have to. You just have to provide consistent value to a group of people in a meaningful way.
Yeah, as far as the networking stuff goes, you were talking about it's all about people, and I've found that since I started doing this podcast that the people I meet on the show, like yourself and other guests that we've had, and even the panelists, it's just such a enriching experience. I learned so much, and people say to me like I was in an interview and somebody came into the room while I was waiting in between interviews, and they're like, "Hey, I just wanted to say I listened to your podcast and it's really awesome." That's really weird because we don't have 1,000 downloads a month. So I was really impressed and amazed, and the community has just been so great to us.
Yeah, my friend Cliff Ravenscraft. In fact, if you go listen to his latest episode of Podcast Answer Man, and honestly, this is if you're trying to build an audience or a brand in any way, this is critical stuff because he talks about how to. It's a talk that he gave at Podcast Movement, and he basically talked about how to build a better relationship with your audience. And to be honest, the way that you do that is by getting to know them. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it really is the case. The example that he usually gives is that people ask him, I only have 300 downloads a month or something, right? And, that's 300 people that listen to you every month. I mean, if you really think about sitting 300 people in a room, I mean, that's a conference talk. That's like half of a keynote room in a conference, right? So you're speaking to all these people. And then if you get to know them, so you get to know John, and John listens to JavaScript Jabber. I'm actually talking about a real person here. John, he listens to JavaScript Jabber and Freelancer Show. He listens to Ruby Rogues on occasion, and he's not super stoked about Adventures in Angular, but he's kind of interested. He lives here in Utah. You get to know these people. You get to know what they're about. You get to know what kind of a difference you made. Those are the people that you're talking to, and those are the people who are going to come through for you when you need them. And so when you are between jobs or between contracts, or when you need support for the show one way or the other, you need to get the word out about stuff. They're down to give you do you a favor, and at the same time, they feel like they know you. I hear that all the time. I feel like I know you. I hear you. I listen to you every day, and I mean that's the difference. That's the brand. Sure, it makes a big difference if you're trying to target a market to get those kinds of responses from people in the market. But if you want those responses, go talk to people in the market. Go figure out who they are, not just what company they work for and how big their pocketbook is, but really go and figure out what they're about. Do they love to ski? Do they love to sing? Do they go rock climbing? Are they married? Do they have kids? Does their spouse work? What kind of value have they gotten from your show? I mean, that's as far as audience building and things like that, that's what really matters. Same thing for blogs, same things for videos. I mean, find out who these people are, find out what really makes them tick, really identify with them, and you will make such a huge difference in your market. And if you do, if you're targeting professionals, then do the same thing with them, and they will become your advocates, and they'll go out there and they will build your brand for you.
One of the things too you talk about on the Freelancer Show a lot is, blogging versus going to events and speaking, dev relations, not as much of that, but marketing especially as well, and like what the value is you're getting out of that for the time that you're putting in. So it can be a struggle because I know for me, I love to write, but I'm more of the creative writing. So when I try and sit down and do a technical writing piece, it takes me like forever. So the amount of time I would spend, I wouldn't get as much value as doing something like a podcast here. So how do you identify what works for you as far as like what are the things that I can do to get out there? How do you identify that?
So I mean, you mentioned a bunch of them: blogging, speaking, videos. Free courses, ebooks. I mean, there are as many options as you can count. And really, the only thing that I have been able to find that's consistent is that you have to try it for at least a month. So try doing the podcast, for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Try doing the blog for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. Go speak at a few events and really get a feel for what's there. And then I want to back up because that's not going to be enough time for you to get good at it, which is something that people really... How do I get good at podcasting? Well, you do it a lot. Okay, so 6 weeks is, your podcast is going to be kind of crappy, okay? But the thing is that if you find it's natural, you enjoy doing it without stressing out about the details of what you're getting wrong, you'll figure out, oh, okay, I really enjoy speaking, but dang it, I got to get better at this. And that's where I was earlier this year, so I went and joined Toastmasters, because I really enjoy speaking at conferences, and I'm like, okay, I kind of don't do great at this, and I want to get better. And so, I've been doing that, and I've been looking at other training programs for speaking and things like that. But, I keep putting in calls for proposals and trying to get speaking deals at conferences because I enjoy it. Podcasting comes very naturally to me. I like to talk. The videos also work out nicely for me. Blogging has been a struggle. And, it's just the way it is. I want to get better at blogging, but I have trouble making it a priority because it feels like work. The other thing is, though, is that if you recognize, so for example, you said I'm good at writing, but I'm really more in the creative writing arena. Well, what that says to me is that I like telling stories, and you can make code into a story. You can create scenarios where you're telling a story with your code and also demonstrating whatever principle you're trying to demonstrate. It doesn't have to be the classic class car and it has one class engine, object underneath it. Tell a story. If you're trying to make an association, make it, you have class Joe, or you have person, class person with Joe, and Joe goes to the dentist, and so, I don't know, but you can make it fun. You can make it tell a story, and then what happens is that the principles that you're trying to elaborate on will come out naturally. And so it's not just about, oh, I'm not good at blogging, but it's really what clicks for me, what makes that connection for me. And it's not just writing, it's how you write and who you write for. It's not just podcasting, but it's who are you talking to as guests, who are you talking to as audience, who are you associating with, who are you getting to know, what other rewarding things are you getting out of it. I went through this a lot with the podcasts, and I finally just took some time during podcast movement. I keep bringing that up, but it was like a week ago, and I just took some time in my hotel room because I was like, yeah, some of these shows are less fun than others. What's the difference? Why am I doing this? Because I put in a lot of time on podcasts, and what I came to was I enjoy the shows where I'm learning something. And so why am I doing these shows? Well, the audience is like reason number 3. Me learning something is reason number 1. Me getting to hang out and chat with my friends who are the other hosts is reason number 2. And so it's like, okay, well, how do I maximize that? How do I make the most of that? Because that's what the payoff is for me. And so it's, okay, well, we're not scheduling any more shows that are, hey, so-and-so is cool, let's get so-and-so on the show. Now it's going to be, hey, I really want to learn more about X, and so we're going to have a panel discussion about X, and so-and-so knows a lot about X and can really make this a great show. And, can help me learn, help me get to the point where I want to go and explore it some more when we're done recording. A lot of times you really have to figure that out, and you can't figure that out a lot of times until you actually get in and go after, okay, I'm going to start blogging. And then you start figuring out, okay, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, or this is what I'm getting out of it, and I want to get more of that out of it, so how do I change the way I'm blogging in order to get that? I don't know what to say other than that, but, try it, play with it, do something unconventional with it, and then just explore and figure out what pays off. And what I found is I've had a few people come back to me and say, I tried blogging, it didn't work. I tried podcasting, it didn't work. I tried videos, it didn't work. I tried writing an ebook, and that didn't go over. I hate speaking in front of people. And I'm just like, then, what you're doing is you're trying to do this in a way that you think everybody expects you to do instead of the way that you would naturally do it if you just did it. Try them all and fiddle with the format, like I said, fiddle with everything else, figure out what kind of speaks to you and gets you excited. And it can be code. I've been talking about these other things, but it can be code too. And then just go do it.
That's a great way to look at it. I didn't even think of that, to be telling a story that way. Because most of the blogs that I've read, they have some technical value for me where, okay, I see what they did here, now I can apply it to this other project. But I think I'm definitely going to try that now. That's a great suggestion
too. People love stories.
I think another good thing to come out of what you just said is, so if you are a developer, which if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are, if you go back and look at code that you wrote 3-4 months ago, there's going to be something in there you're going to be like, you kind of feel bad about it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because you've gotten better in those months going forward. And it's the same way with all this other stuff. If you start writing a blog post and you try it for a month or something like that, and you write 6 blog posts in that time frame, you go back to the beginning, it's not going to be as good as the one that you just recently published. So you will get better at these things. So don't just take a one-off, being like, this isn't as good as Charles Max Wood, who's been doing this for however long. It's not as good as him, so I'm going to stop doing it. It's not the way to look at it. You are going to get better at things. It's the same way with podcasts and blogs and speaking and other things as it is with your code. A year ago, you were not as good as you are right now. And that's something very important to keep in mind while you're going through these things, because there are going to be growing pains, and you have to be comfortable with accepting those.
Yep. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking was just that people identify, or people will learn better from people who are about the same level as they are. And this comes out in Pragmatic Thinking and Learning by Andy Hunt. He talks about the Dreyfus model. Great book. He points out that experts aren't always the best people to be teaching the beginners, because they've kind of internalized and don't explicitly think about the steps that the beginner needs to understand in order to get stuff done. And so even if you're a beginner, even if you don't have the same reputation or experience as somebody else, you could probably explain it in much better terms for somebody else who's maybe a step below you.
That's a really good point. And actually, just thinking about that, going back to, I can't remember, X number of years ago when I was first trying to figure out what this phone gap thing was, I was starting to mess around in some of that stuff, and they kept talking about all this command line stuff, and which was something I did not have a lot of experience with. So that exact thing is like everything was going just one level over my head, because I didn't understand how to navigate through these different things. That's actually I'd never thought of that before, but that is a really good point, is that somebody that has just learned it and moved on could probably tell you how to do it much easier.
Absolutely.
So how do you manage, you said you had 4 children, and you're still married, so that's awesome. But,
I'm a mean dad, I'll tell you. Not bad.
So I have 2, Justin has 3. And I don't know how, even I have 2, and I don't know how you guys manage with 3 and 4. How do you manage that balance of family life and getting out there and doing these things?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you've listened to the Freelancer show, you know that I think balance is mostly an illusion, at least the way people think about it, because they're like, okay, I've got 6 pots, I'm going to fill each pot with the same amount of water. Well, it doesn't work that way. So sometimes in life, I am pushing the pedal to the metal, and I basically get up in the morning. I mean, we do have a little bit of a morning routine with my kids, so and then especially during school too. But we get up and we read scriptures and we pray as a family, and then we get ready for school and we get lunches together and we get everybody dressed and blah 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 blah. My youngest is 4, or he's going to be 4 in a couple weeks, so he doesn't go to school, but the other kids do. And, and then my wife drives him to school and things like that. And during the summer, I just basically make sure that I get time with them. So, I mean, this evening, it wasn't much, but I had 3 kids sitting on me while we watched American Ninja Warrior. And, we talked about it. And, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's a really dumb show, right? It's fun to watch them, go up there and try and do these amazing things, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a big difference. We're sitting there watching the show, but the thing is that you just make the time. During the day, since I work from home, so, for example, today is one of the days I record podcasts. So I have Ruby Rogues at 10, I have Freelancer Show at noon, and then I have JavaScript Jabber at 2, and then I have Cub Scouts, because I'm a Cub Scout leader, at 5. And so when I get the breaks, because you can tell those are 2 hours apart. Each show we record probably typically an hour to an hour and a half. When I get done, I just go downstairs and chase my kids around for a few minutes. And they know I'm there. They know I care. A lot of times that's all that really matters. And then I do make time to go and make them cry while they try to ride their bikes. I'm working on that with my 2 oldest. I'll walk around the block while my 3-year-old rides his bike, because he doesn't fall over because he has training wheels on, but he'll go around the block like 6 times. We go for walks. But I mean, some weeks I'm just heads down working for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And then, I'll have a period of time where I can go and do more of the other things with the kids. I'm also pretty involved at their school. I'm on the school board. I'm actually the board secretary. And so I get to talk to them about what's going on at school because I know what's going on at school. My wife is also fairly involved at the school, and just things like that. And it really just boils down to time, and it doesn't always have to be big quantities of time. And the other thing is that I'm serving them when I'm doing the other work, right? So when I'm earning money, we're paying for the house, we're paying for food, and so that's a trade-off that sometimes I have to make just because I have to make the bills get paid. So I think it ebbs and flows, but ultimately, if they see me a few times a day and we have a good time, and then there are a few other things that we do together periodically. I try and take them out to McDonald's because they love McDonald's. I don't know why they love McDonald's, but they love McDonald's. They get to go to McDonald's with Dad, and it's a big deal. We have here in Utah County, there's a pass of all passes, which gets you into the water park. It gets you into the little putt-putt golf little area over there, and then there's a movie theater in town that'll get you in for free, and it's an older theater. It doesn't have the stadium seating and stuff. But that kind of stuff too. I mean, just taking the time to, go see a movie with them and stuff. I mean, it's funny, but it's a big deal. And then the rest of work-life balance, I do make time for my wife. When we talk a lot about a lot of things, and it really is about time. But at the same time, she understands again when I have that ebb and flow of, oh, I've got to work a lot this week, or no, I don't have to work a lot this week. And then we just plan ahead and make the most of it.
And do you end up traveling a lot? Like, do you need to do that for marketing and for branding?
So in years past, I really haven't traveled a lot. This year I have. And it was more just things that I wanted to do. So let's see. I went to Las Vegas in April for 2 different conferences. I went to MicroConf, and then I went to New Media Expo. And both of those were just terrific networking opportunities. And they really do pay off. But I don't think you necessarily need to do that if you're making associations or relationships with other people. You don't have to do that in person. I think you make better relationships with people in person, but you can augment your online relationships by meeting people in person and getting to know them a little bit better. I don't know why that makes such a difference, but actually being able to, go and shake someone's hand and tell them that they're important to their face, it makes a big difference. I wound up doing training in Atlanta 2 different times for CareerBuilder.com. I was teaching them to test Ruby on Rails. Small pitch, if you need that kind of training, I'm still willing to do it for you. I was also in Atlanta for RailsConf, and I spoke at RailsConf. I was at Podcast Movement this summer. Entre Programmers we're planning a retreat in October. We're going to be going to Mexico, but and that's another in-person gathering with people. But you don't have to, and in a lot of cases, a lot of people they have anxiety about being around other people, or they're just not comfortable. They're not interested. I mean, if you build a quality blog or a quality podcast, you never really do have to go and meet people in person. I think it's good for you, but some people just can't. They have these things and they can't. I recently set things up so that people could get a 15-minute chunk of my calendar who listen to my shows. And so if they go to a certain URL, then they get pushed onto Calendly, and they can pick a time to talk to me. And again, I'm not going to meet them in person. I don't have to travel, but I get to talk to people and find out what the show's mean to them. And that builds that kind of rapport where, hey, look, I care about the people listening to the show, and the ones who are really interested in connecting with me get a chance to do that. And then I can build these kinds of things, but I don't actually have to travel. The flip side of that is when I went to Podcast Movement Thursday night, I flew in Thursday afternoon. Thursday night, a bunch of the folks in the Ruby users group came and met me in Fort Worth, and we all went to dinner. And so, again, it's nice. It pays off. I got some great ideas and great feedback from some folks. One guy said, if it wasn't for Ruby Rogues, I wouldn't have a programming job right now. That's a payoff. I don't have to be there in order to get out of Ruby Rogues what I want to get out of it. It's just kind of a bonus thing. And, so you don't, I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't have to, but I think it's highly beneficial to travel.
Yeah, I just had my first experience traveling to California recently to Google I/O, and I have to say, meeting like Zeno Rocha in person, Aaron Frost, Justin, it's like I feel like wow, this is such a different experience than virtual, and it was really awesome to talk with everybody. So I can totally see the value, but it's very difficult with family. I found to justify travel a lot.
But you've got this podcast too, where you can bring the people you want to talk to onto the show. And,
yeah, which has been awesome.
So you get that at least, and then when you can travel, you do. I mean, it's another one of those work-life balance things where you're going to have seasons where you can and seasons where you can't, and you'll just make it work.
Yeah, the first show we did of this, it was just me, and I went to Ruby Nation here in DC, and I got to meet David Bach, I got to meet Russ Olson, and all these famous Ruby people. Evan Light was there, and it was I had like one-on-one interviews, I had group interviews, I talked with people who were in the audience, and got their feedback on the presentations, and it was just like such a family type of feeling. Like the Ruby community has really done so much for me, so I wanted it to be something like I wanted that my first podcast to have something to do with that, and that was a really great experience.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience at Podcast Movement because Dan Benjamin spoke, and I was all excited about that. So I go in and I'm talking to him and I'm like, by the way, thanks for the articles on Hive Logic, and he just looks at me like nobody talks to me about Hive Logic anymore. But I mean, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And even though you get a little bit fanboy at the same time, I made a connection there, and he and his assistant were both like, yeah, reach out, and she's like, I'll make sure he answers your emails, because he gets busy, But yeah, I mean, it was. Yeah, you make those connections, and they're so critical. But like I said, I mean, I haven't met all of the hosts of all of my podcasts, and I talk to them every week. And those are connections that I value that make a lot of difference. So, I mean...
Yeah, we have somebody from Utah over there. We have Tyler McGinnis, and he's over at... he does some Egghead videos, and he's a Firebase expert. He's awesome. I finally got to hang with him at the after party, and... yeah, that was really cool too. So that's another reason to travel. I thought that was great.
Yeah, one of the Egghead IO guys is actually, he lives in the same city I do, and it's fun, it's so fun to make those connections.
How do you deal with the social networking? Like, how much time do you invest in that, and is it worth it? Because I know a lot of developers don't even have profiles. Like they're like against it. They just want to sit and code. Not me. I'm on all the time.
So I have a few thoughts there. I mean, as far as the way I use it, I'm not a super prolific tweeter. I'll just put that out there up front. I tweet all my shows. I tweet promotional stuff for like Angular Remote Conf, and I'm going to start doing it for Rails clips. I'm also going to tell everybody that I actually cheat. I use meetedgar.com, and I schedule those tweets because I want them to go out every day, and I don't have to worry about when I'm tweeting them. But then, I tweet all of the I try to tweet other stuff that's human stuff. The other thing that I've seen, though, is that I've had people react where they tweet at me because they listen to me every day, and so they think I'm some kind of celebrity. And I don't feel like one, but they react like oh, he tweeted back to me, I can't believe, and it's not such a big thing, but you can make those same connections there. So people know that you're willing to take the time. And what did you do? You typed 140 characters? Or if you had to spread it across 2 tweets, 280 characters? And, maybe think about it for a minute. And in a lot of cases, I'm like, just send me an email. Because, I can't tackle this as as a tweet. And, but it shows people you're willing to take the time if you're building a platform, and it's also a great way to reach out to people and make connections with people that you want to have that connection with. So, you see people tweet at major celebrities that have hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers, and they get a reply back, and it's like, holy cow, this guy cares enough to respond. He doesn't know who I am, but that doesn't matter. And it's a big thing. But I think the big thing is if you're going to try and build social networks or use social networks, find the place where and so that can be forums, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. You can also set up your own networks there by setting up a forum or setting up a Facebook page or a Facebook group. There are a lot of different ways to go with that. But ultimately then just let people see you be a person. So if you're having the Mondo burger with 6 patties and 5 slices of cheese and an entire tomato on there, take a picture. That's the joke that lunch, people post what they had for lunch on Twitter, but it's human. It's like, holy cow, I have half a cow on a bun right here. I'll post when I'm going to lunch with folks. Hey, it's great to have lunch with David Brady and whoever else, or whatever. And just let people know, hey, I'm out and about doing human things. I go to Walmart and, I see funny stuff and I'll take a picture and post it. There's a whole website about that, by the way, that I didn't put together, but it's pretty funny. But just things like that. And so, you balance that with the actual day-to-day business stuff, and then people can kind of get an idea of what you're about. So, yeah, I'm about Angular Remote Conf right now, and I'm about Rails clips right now, and I'm about the podcast right now, but I'm also about my kids, and I'm about part of Utah, and I'm about scouting, and I'm about Christianity, and I'm about a bunch of other things, and so people can see that. Now, I'm a little bit careful. I don't post things that I think are going to set people off, so I don't go into politics. I don't go telling people that they're evil because they don't believe the same thing I believe. But at the same time, I do try and give people that flavor of, okay, these are the things I'm thinking about. These are the people I'm following. And even if they don't agree with it, at least they kind of get a flavor for who I am. And again, it then builds that rapport. So then there are the few people that are like, okay, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to talk to you. And then when we start talking, they know what to talk to me about. They know what I care about. They know what I'm thinking about at the time. It's much easier to build that rapport because then I just can, I can figure those things out about them too. So I can go look at their Twitter stream. I can go look at what they're posting on Facebook, and then I can just talk to them. And a lot of the things that I post are things that other people identify with, even if they're not having my exact experience. Anyway, that's kind of how I think about social networking. I don't know if it's completely right, but it's kind of the way that I approach it.
Sounds good to me.
I definitely have similar approaches with that. But one thing that I have learned from having a few accounts hacked is to do the 2-factor authentication and be smart about the security of those things. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there are a lot of the security things. I have randomly generated passwords on all of my stuff, and then I store it in a password vault. And,
it's not as bad as what happened to Chris Corrier, though, right? Like where his social security number was put out on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like that was crazy. If you ever listened to, he had a Shop Talk episode with the hacker too.
Oh, really?
Pretty awesome. Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
I missed that one, but
you should go back. It was worth listening. All right, so we're over time because it's been a good conversation. So apologies for that.
Yeah, Chuck doesn't shut up.
It's great though. We love it. If people want to learn more about your brands, about the events you're doing, the podcasts, I have to say I was at your JavaScript. I was at JavaScript Remote Conf, and that was an incredible experience. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm actually posting those right now. If you go to remoteconfs.com. you can get those. I think we're up to 5 or 6 talks from JS Remote Conf, and when I run out of those, I'm posting the Ruby Remote Conf talks. So, but everything's at devchat.tv. You can follow me on Twitter at cmaxw. So C is my first initial, W is my last initial, Max is my middle name. So cmaxw. I'm also on Facebook, but not very often. And LinkedIn is linkedin.com/ I think it's /Charles Max Wood. And you can find me on there. And just put in there that you listen to one of my shows or that you listen to this episode of the Web Platform Podcast. And I'll friend you. We can be friends. Other than that, Angular Remote Conf is what I'm working right now. I don't know when this goes out, but we have early bird tickets through the 25th, and the call for proposals open through the 31st. And then I'm working on Rails Remote Conf, so keep an ear to the ground for that. And just if you follow me on Twitter, I'll be putting information out about that as well. And then all of the shows have their own Twitter accounts and stuff, so you can find all that stuff. But you can find it all at devchat.tv. And then finally, like I said, Rails clips. If you're into Rails and you want a weekly dose of Rails knowledge, then go check that out. Right now I'm focused on building APIs with Rails. I got a lot of requests for that, so I've pretty much covered every which way you can put together a view in JSON or XML. And then I'm going to be digging into security, a little bit of optimization, and kind of the end-to-end. They have some like full stack solutions for APIs as well, so I'll be digging into all that stuff.
That's great stuff. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting.
Thank you very, very much.
Hopefully I said something smart.
No worries.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Erik Isaksen at eIsaksen,
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.